one of the hardest decisions of my life ended up turning into one of the biggest positives of my life.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. If you remember back to our 2026 Trends episode, Dr. Jen Quammen mentioned the direction of vet med is likely to use AI as a co-pilot. In other words, a super functioning digital assistant. Well, here I am recording this intro at VMX in Orlando, the largest veterinary conference, and AI and innovation are hot topics. So this episode is very timely to share a conversation with someone who is very passionate about helping to shape where veterinary medicine is headed with artificial intelligence and technology tools, and how we get there in a way that actually serves people and pets. I have for you Dr. Mike Mossop, a veterinarian who's lived many sides of the profession, from emergency and general practice to launching a unique mobile veterinary service. He's also very vulnerable about sharing having to close a business and his learnings from that. He's now the Chief Veterinary Officer of CoVet, and Mike has the vision to enhance the intersection of technology and relationship-centered veterinary care to meaningfully improve patient care, client experience, and professional well-being. In this episode, we talk about the evolution of the veterinary-client relationship, how technology can be used to enhance, not replace, what makes vet med special, and why staying grounded in our values is the key to shaping the future. So if you've ever felt caught between excitement and overwhelm when it comes to the future of our profession, this episode offers a thoughtful, inspiring lens and a reminder that innovation should always start with people. Let's get to the conversation with Dr. Mike Mossop. When did you know that you were even interested in veterinary medicine?
Yeah, sure. Well, first I'll actually just start by saying thank you. And I appreciate you having me on, and it's going to be a fun talk here. So I'm excited to get into it. Um, I have to say, I'm not one of those people who thought they would be a vet since they were, 4 or 5 years old, anything like that. I actually didn't have too many pets growing up. That's mostly on my parents, I guess. But we had a few like hamsters and gerbils and stuff like that. I actually, I guess, through like high school and undergrad, thought I was going to be like an evolutionary biologist. So I've always been fascinated by like nature and evolution and all the crazy animals. And I think that probably comes through like a love of camping and cottaging and stuff like that I had growing up. So when I went to university, I decided to do zoology just because I found it was really interesting. And I did work on a number of research projects and they were very rewarding. But I think what happened is as I got to the end of the degree, I don't know, I honestly wasn't super excited about writing grants and writing papers and like the important parts of those jobs. It was more the field work that I was interested in. And part of me, I have some friends, a friend who's like a whale biologist and other people I know doing really cool stuff that would obviously have been a very interesting career path. But I guess at that point in time, I decided to look for something that was a little bit more practical. Like I've also always liked talking to people. I've always liked doing things with my hands. And so, veterinary medicine seemed like a practical application of that love of, animals and evolution and science. And so that's kind of how I ended up starting down that path.
Was there a person that mentioned it where it kind of triggered you to think about it? Or, were you like, do you remember?
Yeah. I mean, that is a good question. And I'm not sure. I mean, I do. There was a vet clinic that I kind of volunteered in and worked as like summer jobs and stuff like that. And so some of the people in that clinic were instrumental in like setting me down this path. And I'm very thankful for them. Like Beth gave me, the clinic manager was like the first person to really take a chance on me. And I really appreciate that. And then Kia, Tracy, Lynn, these are vets that were working at that clinic, and they were really my mentors in my early career. And I actually, after graduating from vet school, like I went back there to work as a veterinarian. So I saw them in different capacities, but they're the people who jumped to mind. But honestly, I don't remember what led to me getting that first job at the clinic. I think it was maybe just me experimenting, and maybe I had the idea of, vet medicine seems kind of cool. It's a nice application of these animal skills. And I probably just walked in the door and handed in a resume or something like that. And the rest is history. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I'm curious with the background in zoology and probably working with different species and things like that. When you were going into veterinary medicine, yes, having some experience, it sounds like in a small animal practice. When you went into vet school, did you have an idea of what being a veterinarian was going to be like? Did you know what animals, or did that kind of evolve and change going through vet school?
Yeah, it definitely did evolve and change in going through vet school. And again, coming from that kind of zoology, biology background, like I was still, and honestly, this part of me who is still interested in like zoo medicine and stuff like that. I did some, fourth year rotations at the Toronto Zoo, and I did school for a semester in Africa, which was a fantastic experience. I think from this kid dream realization perspective, like I probably thought I'd be one of these vets who's on TV, dealing with like polar bears or wildlife on the savannah. And that just didn't play out. And again, it maybe is me just being more practical and looking closer to home. But there's still part of me who would have loved to have gone down that path. And I think that people who practice in that part of our industry are, very fortunate and doing some really cool stuff. So
Yeah. Well, we have some commonalities then. I also started with an interest in zoo and did some work in Africa and all of that.
yeah.
So,
Oh, cool.
yeah, it's good when you're that age and you have the ability to go and experiment, do
Yeah.
those things. Yes, and here we are. But so you said you went back to the clinic that you had spent, pre-vet school at. So what was the experience going back to the same clinic? Was that an easy transition, or what was it like starting out for a new doctor?
Yeah, so I mean, it was pretty easy, and I think it's in part due to the people at the clinic like welcoming me back and embracing kind of my new role. Now, it wasn't my first job out of school. Like I did graduate and I worked in an emergency clinic for 4 or 5 years, and then actually transitioned back to this kind of neighborhood general practice that I had started at. And I was ready for transitioning out of emergency medicine. Like that was just not my thing. And again, the people who are doing that day in, day out, I have a lot of respect for them. But I guess maybe it was from my prior experience at that clinic. It was and is a very well-run, kinda high-end neighborhood clinic, and I really like the way they practice and their quality of medicine, and so it clearly gave me a goal of something I wanted to kinda transition to, and knowing the people there, it made the transition very easy, and we had a lot of fun together, and like I said, they welcomed me back, they made it easy, so.
Yeah. Well, then I'll back up. I apologize. So right after vet school, when you're looking for your first job, how did you decide upon or come across the emergency route?
Yeah, so I think I looked at it as a sort of trial by fire to some extent, right? Like I decided not to go down the path of doing an internship and a residency, but I felt that this was a good challenge, and it was a good challenge. uh, I learned a lot, and I think I was basically trying to seek that out. So there was that component. I mean, honestly. Labor market has shifted a lot since the time I graduated, but finding jobs were not as easy as well. And so again, this was a well-regarded practice that I knew of in the city I wanted to be in, and the opportunity came up, and I was happy to get the job there, and again worked there for 3 or 4 years, and I did really like it, but I have to say, especially like the overnights and stuff like that, is just not for me. So I was also happy to move on to something different. So
I think that's a common story for people. It is good experience because when you're coming out of vet school, you need a lot of exposure and to learn. So as long as you have some support there too, because it's not good to
yeah,
like go straight out into failure. Like that's not the best way to do
yeah.
it either. But it does allow you a lot of exposure and cases to kind of find what you do like and also just get a little bit more confidence, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe another thing that attracted me there as well is that there was a decent sized team, right? Like it was nice. I'd be on the floor during the day at least with 5 or 6 other veterinarians, so there was lots of guidance and mentorship in it. So that was really great. Night shifts on my own were a little different, but they didn't drop me into that right off the bat. So
Good, good, good. Well, because I know what some things are coming, was there anything that you started to notice about the way practices were run that you were starting to note, like these, I like this aspect of things, and so that you could gravitate towards? Were you starting to collect this information, or is this a little premature for that?
yeah, no, I mean it was starting, although I don't know that it was at like a conscious level, right? Like I think it's just something that kind of seeps in over time the longer you're there. I think part of what I liked about the general practice that I ended up going back to, it's Pretoria Animal Hospital in Ottawa, Canada, by the way. But They had a very tight bond with their clients, right? Like these are people who had been taking their pets to the same few veterinarians in the same clinic for, 10, 20 years. And they, I think, really did a good job at that kind of relationship centered care. And so that's something that I think is really important to me in veterinary medicine. And there's other things I did in my career that tried to kind of double down on that as well. So that's kind of the one most important thing I think that seeped in over time. So.
Mm. Okay, well, maybe we need to hold this question, but I'm curious your perspective of, do you still see that like this, I'm sticking with the same vet for decades and decades, or do you feel
Yeah.
like there is a little less of that loyalty? Hold that question because I want to get further into you have
Yeah.
experience and you start. But yeah, no, I want to double click on that because that's fascinating. I have that interest. So you go back to, you're doing general practice. I think you even become medical director at the clinic as well. Now I do know because I listened to your episode, this like 2022 podcast that you did on the Veterinary Innovation podcast, and you said that there was a time when you started to burn out.
Yep.
And so at what point was that? And do you mind sharing just a little bit about that part of your story?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I don't know. I don't know the exact year, but it was probably, I don't know. There's something about like, I'm in a job for like 4 or 5 years and I don't know, I get a little squirrely and need to change. So again, I think it was 4 years in the emergency clinic. And I suspect it was around 4 or 5 years into my experience back at the general practice that I kind of started to feel that. It's probably a multitude of factors that contributed, like some of them just being personal and that kind of thing. But obviously, we are both aware that veterinary medicine is a challenging job in the best of circumstances, right? So high stakes, very emotional, lots of financial stuff going on. Like that kind of adds up over time. And while I don't want to lay all the blame here, like that my time at that clinic was also at the start of like the corporatization of veterinary medicine in Ontario, at least in Canada. So within a couple of years, the clinic, which was an independently owned practice, it was owned by two individuals when I worked there initially and when I was hired as a vet. But it was bought by one corporation, which was purchased by another corporation, which was purchased by a third corporation, all within a couple of years. And so it was a lot of transition. And I think, some of it was burnout, but I think also some of it was just not seeing a path forward that appealed to me, right? Like I could have stayed at that clinic and been medical director for the next, 25 or 30 years. And while there are some aspects of that I really would have liked, I just don't think it had the challenges that I wanted. And I did speak to people in the corporate structure there to see if there was, options for progression and role changes and stuff like that. And frankly, at least at that time, there really weren't a lot of options. I think that has changed a little bit. Like I think a lot of the corporate groups are leveraging veterinarians in more and better ways now. But again, this was kind of the early days. And so, yeah, so I guess I didn't see a path forward. On top of that, it was working long hours for somebody else. And, that kind of coalesced and I just realized that I needed a change. And so I set out on the next chapter from there. So
Just out of curiosity, did you ever think about practice ownership at all?
yeah, I did. And so the next chapter was me owning a practice. It wasn't a traditional
Right.
practice, mind you. But it did like when I kind of reached that point, honestly, I spent some time and I did a little soul searching. Like I did dabble with the idea of going back to school and doing an internship and doing a residency, like specializing in some branch of medicine. Radiology had appealed to me in particular. I've always had like an interest in technology as well. Like I remember my dad worked for IBM, so we had computers from like a really young age, and I think that's kind of where that came from. But anyway, I did. I went back to school and did some rotations, like just shadowing, but realized it wasn't something I was interested in. And I think, that's one thing we touched on previously is just like the idea of trying things out to figure out whether you like them. And so I did a couple of those things. Honestly, I thought about leaving the industry as well, but I didn't think that would serve me well because again I felt that I'd put a lot of time and effort into developing a certain skill set and thought I was pretty good at it, so I didn't want to throw that away. And so I did consider opening a traditional practice, but I think you talk about where there trends or things that had kind of hit me in those first couple of jobs. And there were some positives. So again, like seeing how this practice has run that kind of relationship centered care model really struck me as a positive thing. But I have to say, my general experience in the industry is that despite the people being involved being very, caring and dedicated individuals, I think there are places where veterinary clinics as a whole don't offer the best customer service. And I want to caveat that by saying, like, I'm sure there are a lot of vet clinics out there who do a good job, but I think, and I'm hopeful that people would agree, even though things are well intentioned, there's some factors that make it really difficult, right? And so kind of what I decided was to start what I would call like a non-traditional veterinary practice. So it was called Treat Well Pet Care. It was basically a mobile service, and it was really focused on making things as easy as possible for the pet parent. And I'm happy to dive into that in more detail. But I think the reason I chose that route as opposed to doing a more traditional practice is honestly like one, I wanted to do something different. Like I had some ideas. I wanted to kind of solve this pain point that I didn't see other people addressing well. There was a company based out of San Francisco at that time called Fuzzy, which has since closed. But they honestly, I connected with some people working for them who were inspirational. Like I saw people, they were doing something different. It was very slick. It was very modern. And I liked the people that I had met. So that kind of planted a seed. And I'm like, well, why can't we do that in Canada and do it in my city? So there was that aspect of it. Capital outlay is part of it, right? Like it's not that it took zero money to get the business up and running. Like there was still significant investment, but it's not the same as building a clinic and buying an X-ray machine and all that stuff. So it was kind of an easier entry point in some ways. So those things all kind of coalesced, and that's the path that I went down next. So
I can tell you did a lot of research on this. Like, I mean, you're talking business pieces, like needs, what problems to fill. It sounds like you were networking and looking around. What are people doing? Actually, from the podcast episode I was referring to, you mentioned Rob Trimble, who was part of the early Fuzzy days too. So maybe he was one of those people that you connected with and started to ask questions around. So I guess, do you mind stepping back to what you were saying about that there were some problems and pain points that you were noticing that you wanted to solve? So can you elaborate more about those pain points that you were observing, especially around, I know I hadn't made the note about customer service because I think that's been a hot
yeah.
topic about being a little bit more client centered in how we approach our business models. So yeah, please share your story on that part of it and we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. And it was like Rob was one of the people I talked to. He's great, and we still talk every once in a while when we have a chance. But the real thing, like a really simple example, I think of a customer who has a pet with some kind of chronic medical condition, like maybe an ear infection or something like that. So not something that is constant every day, but something that may be recurrent many times over multiple years. And this maybe circles back to one of the other points you mentioned, but like when that person is seeing the same veterinarian for those 10 years, like you get to a place where like, the patient so well that you can probably make some decisions very quickly about the best treatment for this pet, possibly based on medical factors, but also based on human factors, right? Like I know that this person cannot put drops in the dog's ears, or I know we have tried this other medication before and it just hasn't worked, or it stung the pet's ears, or whatever. So I found that there were these circumstances where people, pet owners, they wanted something simple from their veterinary clinic, but they kind of had to jump through a lot of hoops to get it, right? Like they would call reception and reception's like, well, I don't know if you can do that. You got to bring the pet in. And, they're like, well, I saw the vet, 3 days ago, and we talked about this, but that wasn't noted in the record or something like that. And, maybe this pet is super anxious and doesn't do well in the clinic. So it's a huge stress to them. And it's just, I don't know, I kind of thought of that scenario and felt that there had to be a better way. And so again, with this company Treatwell that we started, we basically tried to, reverse engineer it and say like, okay, how do we make things as easy as possible for the pet parent, but at the same time, not losing sight of like medical standards, right? Like it's not that we want to kowtow to whatever the patient says, like, hey, give me a bunch of antibiotics just because I think my pet has a fever or a UTI or something like that. Like, we're still going to investigate, but it starts to touch on things like spectrum of care and that kind of thing, and realizing that there's the gold standard treatment for something, but for this individual animal and this individual person, like maybe there is a better approach. Even if everybody involved is clear that it's not medically optimal, it's still the best outcome, and people are the happiest that way. So like it's kind of trying to solve that problem is what we're going after.
And the fact that you were doing like a mobile veterinary service practice where you're going into people's houses to do care, like I can't help but, imagine this and like you're going to people's homes. That's
Yeah.
vulnerable. You're getting to know a lot about the pet parent and the pet and the situation. And what you're talking about is yes, the spectrum of care, but the best way to know the best approach for spectrum of care is to really have a good relationship and understanding with the pet owner and to understand the full situation and make the right plan with them. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, what was your experience? Do you mind sharing a little bit about what it's like, being a vet, going into people's homes and that kind of process?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I think there is something incredibly valuable there. Like, and I was happy to be involved in it, and I really like it. And I know there are a lot of other mobile vets out there, even if it's not like the most common situation. I think there are some business challenges there, and I'm happy to get into that as well, which is I think why it maybe doesn't happen more. But you're right that, and with Treatwell specifically, like really fully understanding the situation, like it does go to the next level when you're in somebody's home. Like it's very intimate, and on top of that, like the practice that we built, it was based on a membership plan, right? So like the vast majority of our clients, it wasn't a one-time visit. Like we were seeing them in home at least twice a year. And then there was free telemedicine on top of that in between with us, as opposed to kind of outsourced to a third party. So you could be talking to this client on a monthly basis. And the idea of offering free telemedicine and the membership was to encourage people to reach out if they had a question. Like I always worried that clients kind of did this mental calculus in their head. They were like, they wake up, the pet's itching, and it's like, well, do I want to spend $100 and get the pet to the clinic when it hates going there, just to find out that maybe it's not an issue, and then they don't do anything and the problem gets worse, right? So I was trying to kind of remove barriers and remove friction there, partly by us going to them, and also partly about rolling the telemedicine into the package as well, both by video consult, but even phone, email, that kind of stuff. And so it's just to say, between that membership structure and being in people's homes and seeing how they live and seeing what the situation is and what the limitations are, like it really did inform the care as well. And I think, that's part of the reason our clients were very tightly bonded to us and really like the service, is because it was hard to match that level of service, right? Like you don't get that when you're going to a clinic. And just to speak to your previous point, or your previous question, like I mentioned the idea of seeing the same vet for 10 or 15 years, and I don't think that's as easy to do anymore. Like I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but it's harder to find, right? And I think there's probably a variety of factors at play there. Some of it is kind of the change in corporate structure, but I think part of it is just people work differently than they used to, right? Like people are more likely to work, I don't know, fractional jobs is the right way to put it, but they might work 2 days at one clinic and 2 days at another clinic and maybe a fifth day at something that's not a vet clinic. Like people just like more variety and flexibility. And I get that, right? It makes a lot of sense, but I do find it's a lot harder to find that. We were kind of trying to bring that back to some extent. So yeah.
I think it does exist out there, but yeah, I
Yeah.
that's why I wondered if you were maybe observing the same thing. You talked about some business challenges too, but the other unique thing that you were doing too, like this whole model is unique, and it almost sounds like, oh, you're going back to the, all creatures great in small days, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you were implementing a lot of technology into this as well, trying to make this an easier experience for the pet owner. And from my understanding, you were really intrigued in how we can leverage technology into veterinary care. So, do you mind commenting a little bit more on experimenting with technology, what was working, what wasn't, and then maybe some challenges with the business model too, since you mentioned it?
Yeah, sure. So technology in general has a huge ability to help us. And like, obviously, we'll maybe get into AI and stuff like that a little bit later because that's kind of the hot topic. But even just the internet and the way that's changed care, whether it's advertising and websites or allowing specialists and regular vets to interact, do teleconsult and stuff like that. And so, yeah, all the way through history. I mean, I know there's good and bad that comes with every technology, but I think there is benefit to adopting and working with new technology, and it does tend to move us forward. I mean, electronic medical records is a good example. Like when I started my career, I remember writing on paper, and it was brutal. So, and the records probably weren't very good. So why I have that pro technology bent, maybe it's partly just the way I use it in my life currently. Maybe it's like I said, growing up with computers, and it's always been interesting to me. So what we were really trying to do with Treatwell, the thing that I pictured was basically one website where the person could go and sign up for a membership and book their in-home visits or message me or book a telemedicine visit or order delivery of food or medication to their house. And like just one place that kind of unified everything and made it very easy and user friendly, because I think having a user-friendly design can be very important in terms of rolling out new technology. Like if it doesn't work well or it's a pain in the butt, then people tend not to use it. So yeah, that's basically what we were building. In terms of business challenges, like there was a number of them, but frankly, I think the biggest one is I bit off more than I could chew, in that at least at the start, I was the sole owner. I did end up bringing in a business partner who was a software developer a couple of years in, but we were really building three businesses. Like there was the veterinary clinic, there was a software company that was building the platform, and then there was basically a shipping and receiving business as well. Like we were doing home delivery. Not, we weren't driving it out ourselves, although it started that way on day one, but we quickly moved to using courier services. But we were basically a shipping and receiving hub where we would get stuff from our suppliers, parse it all out, and then have couriers take it to different houses. And so it was like an Amazon type thing at a much smaller scale. But yeah, it's just, I think I underestimated the magnitude of those three businesses combined, and especially with the software one, because even though I always had that technology interest, I had no formal job experience developing software or anything like that. So that was a bit of an eye-opening experience. And just to say, it's not easy to build good software. Like there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into things that you might think are very small and easy to change. So I learned that the hard way. And I think that was one business challenge, is just potentially taking on too much and being undercapitalized and under-resourced for those things. I think the biggest issue with mobile vet care, like people do like it and they are willing to pay more for it. Like obviously we charge more for a typical exam than a regular clinic where the person would come in, but you're missing like higher margin services like x-rays and surgery and dentistry and those kinds of things. And so it does make it a little harder to make the bottom line work when you're missing a huge chunk of the revenue that a typical practice has, yet you're still having conversations about those things and you're having to facilitate those things often through referral to other facilities to make sure that your patient is getting good care. So like you end up putting in a bunch of work and time and resources, and yet the revenue goes somewhere else. And so we had always thought about building like a hub and spoke model where there was like, let's say, one central, not a full clinic, but like basically a surgery, dentistry, imaging facility, and then a bunch of mobile units going out. And I still like that idea. I think it could work well. We were never able to progress to that period. And basically, again, because of the margins and all these factors we've just gone over, like it was tough to make it work financially. It was challenging for me and my family in that regard. But at the same time, like this is when COVID happened, right? So there was that whole thing, and going into people's homes amid COVID was like, there was a lot going on there. Like that was challenging. We managed to get through it relatively well, but a lot of labor challenges in terms of hiring vets. We did have a couple associates, but I was never able to scale it the way I wanted. So I could focus more on running the business as opposed to operating in the business. And then on top of that, I have three young kids now, two of whom are twins. And so like the twins landed in the middle of all this stuff, and it was too much. And we decided, my partner and I, that we needed to kind of change things, and, gave it a really solid effort for about 5 years. And again, that's probably the toughest decision of my life in some way, to shut that business. Like it was really hard, and people did miss us and our clients really liked us, but also understood the need to move on. And so I try and look at it as like, hey, we did a bunch of good, we did something cool, but it was time for something else. So
But I mean, imagine all of the experience that you were able to take from that. You're a veterinarian. I mean, your dad had some technology experience working from IBM, and maybe you were a little bit of an earlier adopter of technology. And sometimes it's really hard to be the early adopter, but you did find your current position
yeah.
with Covet. So I am sure they found all of this experience, everything from them being a newer company, the technology experience, being able to lead something and start something. So, what was kind of the marriage there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I always say like the universe works in mysterious ways, right? And I'm very thankful for that. And I tend to be a bit of a perpetual optimist because of things like that. And again, there's all these decisions I could have made along the way, like going way back to choosing my undergrad or something like that. And life could be very, very different. But I think, more acutely just about like if I had not shut down the business at that particular point in time, if I'd done it earlier or later, my connection and my work with Covet probably wouldn't have happened. So I do feel very fortunate. And even though it was a very challenging time in my life and a very difficult decision, like very shortly after we closed the business, this other opportunity came along and it's ended up being very positive and I'm super happy with kind of where things are. And I never, like, I don't know if you'd asked me when I was 8 if I'd be a veterinarian working in AI, like I would have been, what are you talking about? So it's kind of cool, but basically you're right that even though in some ways, like this Treatwell business ultimately failed, it did lead to a lot of learning that basically facilitated the next step in my career. So it's just, there's no way you could have foreseen that. But my two co-founders, so Yannick Blom, who's our CEO and CTO, and Mike Perron, who's like our COO. I didn't know Yannick. I knew Mike Perron through just general networking. Like he was in the vet space as well, even though he's not a veterinarian. And he and I connected after I shut down Treatwell, and he's like, "Hey, me and I know this guy Yannick, and we're launching a business, and we need a veterinarian to get on board." And so, I think partly because of that technology experience and that experience developing the app with Treatwell, and maybe just my disposition and my my desire to do something a little different and be creative and to build something too, right? Like with Treatwell, it was I still enjoyed the medicine and I liked especially again that relationship centered care that we were practicing, but it was kind of the entrepreneurial bug that bit me a little bit. And I realized that was kind of the thing I was missing a little bit. Maybe this even goes back to working at the general practice where, I wanted to be more autonomous and kind of have a say in the business, the direction was going in and just couldn't get that. So it's just to say I do give Mike and Yannick a lot of credit for seeking out a veterinarian at such an early stage. Like when I came on board, it was really just the two of them kind of experimenting with some ideas. They had a prototype, but they didn't have any paying users or anything like that. And basically, I started just testing the app for them. Like, I wasn't a partner in the business, but I found it interesting. I had some time on my hands and I'm like, yeah, I'll take a look and dig in. And basically one thing led to another and obviously it became a much more formal arrangement and we hit it off pretty well. Like the three of us get along and I think challenge each other and have a very complementary skill set, which is nice. But like I said, I think they had the foresight to bring a veterinarian on at an early stage. And the company Covet that I work with now, we've doubled down on that by hiring more veterinary professionals. But I think because our industry is so kind of nuanced and messy and varied that having that clinical experience is kind of a prerequisite to being able to build something that actually functions well in the real world. Again, having really good user design and workflows so the app is easy to use and not a burden on people is something we've tried from the get-go. And, obviously I kind of have this role of advocating for the profession within the company. Like the whole company is aligned with trying to be very supportive and collaborative of the profession, but it's just nice to know that there's people who have kind of done the job in there advocating for other vets out there using the app in the real world. So like I said, again, very, very thankful of the way things worked out. And this has opened up like a whole bunch of new adventures and opportunities, but there's no question, again, the big thing is like, I know without that experience at Treatwell, which was kind of a bittersweet, right? Like ended up ending not in the way I wanted to, actually led to something bigger and better. So it was kind of cool.
And then also, coming with that mindset of customer service, like again,
Yep.
customer experience, that is super important when it comes to technology. Adam Little talks to me, I guess almost a year today, about why he felt that AI scribes were so quickly adopted within the veterinary community is that they were easy to use and they very clearly solved a pain point for the veterinarian. And so, like, that combination of things made it easy to adopt and still is used. Of course, it's still an opportunity to grow there, but there's a lot of good feedback around that piece of technology. What is your experience when it comes to the veterinary community? And again, you have this unique perspective of being able to identify all these different pain points. What are your thoughts on pain points of veterinary medicine and how technology is able to potentially address some of those, or maybe they already are, not necessarily potentially?
Adam was basically bang on. And I know Adam's a great guy. So he's usually right about this stuff. But like I think it's a combination of the technology is relatively easy to use and the value proposition is just tremendously outsized, right? Like the big pain points is, as we all know, it's just there's never enough hours in the day, right? And whether you're seeing patients or frankly a lot of it, writing records and documenting things, it takes a long time. And if we just had more time, everything gets a little easier. And I do find, using an AI tool like Covet in practice, like it just it saves you time, but honestly, the bigger thing to me is it makes practicing, like I like to say, a little lighter. Like you're just a little bit less stressed knowing that, like, okay, I don't need to worry about like typing down all these details in the next 30 seconds before I run into the next room because it's all been written down for me, right? And I don't have to, dread getting on this 20-minute phone call because I know I'm going to have to spend another 20 minutes documenting it afterwards, like that kind of thing. And it's just that pain is so pervasive and AI eats into that problem so much that it makes it easy for people to adopt. And I think one thing we found, which kind of circles back to the user design thing, like any AI tool, again, is generally easy to use, some more than others. But what we have found is that if an AI tool can get a record to a vet's satisfaction like 80% of the way. And we're talking like both accuracy, but also like style, formatting, wording preferences, stuff like that. Like if you can get it to 80%, it's not good enough. Like people will use it and they'll test it. And within a couple of days or a week, they'll be like, forget it. I can't be bothered. The amount of time I need to spend to get it the rest of the way there is not worth my while. And they just fall back to whatever they were doing previously. And so we have realized that you really need to get the output like, 95, 100% of the way there for people to really embrace it and use it on an ongoing basis. And so, again, speaks to the importance of this is kind of user interface design, but even just the design of like the outputs and kind of the way we've tried to make our system very flexible and customizable, I think has really been a lot of the key to our success. And again, my hope is that I certainly can't take all the credit for this, but like some of the clinical experience is shining through and just recognizing that like every vet out there, we figured this out very early on, like everybody's different and everybody wants to change something. So, which is interesting that there's not as much standardization as there is on the human side. It kind of makes doing this in the vet space a little bit more challenging, but that's fun.
Yeah, let's not trade the human medicine problem.
Share, yeah.
They come with other issues. Yes. So super exciting. Like I am definitely an optimist. I'm very technology interested. So always eager to hear perspectives here. There have been a very large number of companies that have popped up in the veterinary industry very quickly over the past couple of years. And I've also heard not Adam Little, but someone I also admire very much in this area say that his prediction is that there will only be a few that survive. So far, Covet is doing really well. You've done a lot in a relatively short lifespan of a company. Like it's very, very impressive. And let's start with what Covet actually does. And then, like, as you're explaining what Covet is, like, what is something that's really differentiated by Covet and something that you think will help this be a very sustainable model to integrate into veterinary medicine?
Yeah, for sure. I think the backing up is a good idea. So co-vet really is like co-pilot for veterinarians, right? Co-vet. And we choose that word co-pilot very intentionally as opposed to scribe. And we can kind of get into the difference because I know a lot of people have heard the terms AI scribe or scribing, but you can think of us as basically a digital assistant tailored to the veterinarian as opposed to something like the practice management software, which is often tailored to the clinic. And I think there's an important differentiation there. Like, we are working on integrating with all kinds of different practice management software, even where an integration doesn't exist formally, like they're really easy to use together. And we've designed it that way from day one, but it really is something that is tailored to you. So the idea is the more you use it and the more you personalize it and change the settings and create, you can create things called templates within the system. If you put all that hard work in and then you change jobs, it goes with you. Or if you happen to be one of those vets who's, maybe you're a locum and you're working 2 days at this practice and a day here and a day there, like it comes with you everywhere you go. So it's not necessarily tied to the clinic and the PMS, but it does still work in a very fluid and easy way with those systems. Like that's really the vision that we have. And probably the biggest feature, the core feature really is the scribing, right? So taking ambient exam room recordings and turning them into a structured medical record within a few seconds. And that's kind of, when Adam's talking about solving this pain point very quickly, like that has been kind of the wedge, right? It's easy to get in the door when you can save somebody an hour or two per day. That's a huge value. And so that is a big part of what we do. And like I said, we've really focused on making sure vets can kind of customize the output so that it really works for their specific use case and their specific preferences. But coming back to the whole idea of us choosing this name Covat and taking the co-pilot angle as opposed to a scribe angle is we think there's a lot more there. And it's interesting. You're right. I don't know. At VMX last year, there was like 37 scribe companies or something like that. I don't know. I'm curious to see what will be there this year, but I think that over time, that is correct. That number has to go down. Like I don't think they can all be sustained that way. And it is our belief and my personal belief that the ones that will stick around are going to be like Covet, where it really is a more holistic co-pilot or assistant and can do more than just describing. And, that's really, again, what we're focused on. And I think the most tangible examples of that are some things that we've introduced in the app already, but there's even more to come. So things like tracking your to-do list and giving you billing reminders of like, don't forget to charge for this, that, and the other thing, and just doing that all automatically without you having to take any specific action or put any thought into it. It just happens in the background. Like that's kind of the magic of AI. Like I think with a lot of technology, people think of this kind of cold interface and they now have to learn a new technique to interact with the thing. And I think AI is a little bit different in that it actually kind of restores some of the human, like you're adding technology, but it's actually restoring human connection. And what I mean by that, like the best example is now when I'm in an exam room, instead of, turning my back to somebody and typing at a computer and looking at them over my shoulder, I can sit down with them face to face and have a whole conversation and like focus 100% on them instead of focusing, 50 or 60% on my records and 40% on the conversation. So again, you're adding technology, but because of the way AI works specifically and that it kind of takes away a lot of the data entry stuff, which is really the pain in the butt, it can do a lot and can be very powerful. And so, those to-do lists and the billing reminders are one thing, but now we're starting to bring in clinical resources. So cited and sourced textbook material from the NAVC proceedings, stuff like that. And basically presenting it in the context of the case to the veterinarian in something very close to real time. And so it's the kind of thing where 5 or 10 years ago, like you could leave the appointment room and log into VIN and plug in, I'm dealing with a 4-year-old dog and it's a male neutered dog and this is the breed and do a bunch of that stuff and then write a message and then get some answers within a day or two. But this is like, 10, 20 seconds, and that same information is there. And the data entry has been done for you because the AI is listening and can pull out structured data from that rambling conversation. And so that's, I think, the really powerful unlock. And again, it's something where we're really just at the cusp of kind of getting into that kind of stuff. And it's exciting to see where it will go, and also where more sophisticated integrations will take us as well. So just again, making these co-pilot type tools like Covet work seamlessly with the practice management software. So I think that's the next evolution. And again, the companies that can do that will succeed, and the companies that don't, I think will just kind of slowly fade away.
And I loved that aspect of it allowing us to be a little bit more human and have a more human connection. Because even when you were earlier describing how you don't have to remember certain things because you know that the AI is recording for you, in my head, I was like, it like removes brain space, right? Like
Yeah.
this mental load that we're having to hold of, okay, I have to remember which leg, I have to remember, oh, Mrs. Smith's daughter is also in town and I need to ask her about that. Like, like all those things that you're trying to hold in your mind is extremely stressful. So the fact that you can actually stop, give them your full attention and listen and know that you're going to remember everything. You were talking about like creating a to-do list, and I'm like, man, I need to start using AI more myself to like create my to-do list for me. So yeah, I think it's super exciting time that we are in, and I am running out of time. Speaking of time with you, I like to end my conversations with two things because I haven't allowed you to do this yet. First of all, what is something that you would like to share with the veterinary audience? Any words of wisdom or anything that you would like to make sure that we touch on that we haven't yet today?
Yeah, I do think so. With because obviously I'm seeing a lot of stuff around AI, right? I'm working in all kinds of aspects of the company, but really my foundation is almost in like the support side of the company, right? Like as the veterinarian who was the only person who kind of spoke the clinical talk at the beginning, when a user writes in and says, "Hey, this isn't working or that isn't working," I was the person dealing with that, and we now have a very capable team that does it, but AI tools are generally, as we've said, very easy to use and really easy to get started with. There is a kind of a set of soft skills that you can develop that will make AI written records and AI tools even better for you, right? So I don't think it's a huge learning curve, and I don't want people to feel daunted. Honestly, my best advice, if you haven't tried using an AI tool like Covet, I'd encourage you to just should sign up. Like you can get a free trial and just try it out. Like the best way to learn and to become comfortable with what these tools can and cannot do is to simply try using it and experimenting, right? And it goes back to, again, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my career and trying out radiology or something like that. Like you don't know until you try it. So, but there are some soft skills, and I don't think you need to change the way you speak in the room significantly, but it is important to remember, like, the AI or AI tools at this point, like, they're really working on just text, right? So, like, there are audio recordings, but often those are transcribed into text, and so the AI and Covet, like, it doesn't have as much context as you do as a human being in the room who is seeing the person and seeing how the pet behaves and feeling the abdomen and all this stuff. So, like, you kind of have to find ways to get that context to the AI if you want your record to be really good. And it could just be something as simple as like you give a vaccine and then you say something like, "Hey, we're giving this vaccine in the right hind leg and it's good for a year," or something like that. And, I think there's very artful ways to weave that kind of stuff into a conversation, but other people do it in different ways. And maybe they don't want to talk about this in front of the client. But when the client leaves the room, like in 10 seconds, you can say a bunch of stuff to the AI and just add it to the recording that gives more technical detail or adds information that you didn't say out loud. So just kind of being cognizant of that, like the fact that the record you're going to get out of an AI system is only as good as the information you put into it, I think is important and kind of gets glossed over. And AI is a little magical at some points, but again, there are limitations, and so I think developing some of those soft skills are important. And we could, again, there's a whole other conversation to be had around that, but that would be, I guess, my parting words. So
That's really good, and honestly, it's probably good for the pet parent that you're actually explaining everything that
yeah,
you're doing. I think there's studies on that actually, that we probably should be explaining more about what we're doing. So
yeah, there's no question. I mean, we get a lot of kind of feedback that says exactly that. Like, it's like, okay, I am, I'm saying things for the AI, but I've actually noticed that like my clients have mentioned how much they appreciate me kind of explaining things. And, sometimes I'll even say to somebody in a room, like, hey, I'm gonna say something to my notes, and I'll blurt out 30 seconds about a mass or something in technical terms. And then I'll turn to them and say, like, hey, so what this really means is like we're dealing with this, and I don't think it's a big problem or whatever. But yeah, it does kind of spark different conversations. And I think, again, these AI tools, they are helping veterinarians, but I think another thing that's coming down the pipe is just helping pet parents and clients more and more, right? So these recordings can also be used to create, summaries and material that I think will help the client understand and kind of indirectly help convey the value that the veterinarian is providing, right? Like the person leaves with a better understanding of what happened in the room, both through the way they're speaking, but also those materials that are maybe being sent home afterwards. And I think, increasing our value to clients certainly will be a positive effect for the industry on the whole, obviously.
yeah. Well, and finally, my last question is, when I say what's something you're really grateful for, what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of things. Like I have a young family. Everybody's really relatively healthy, and so that's kind of first and foremost, I would say. But the other one is kind of what I referred to earlier. So, like I said, I kind of one of the hardest decisions of my life ended up turning into one of the biggest positives of my life, and so I feel very fortunate for that. And I think some of it was through a little bit of effort and risk taking and putting myself out there, but some of it was just dumb luck as well, right? So, and I recognize that, but I'll take it and I appreciate it.